What's up, nerds? Are you guys ready to be talked at about another AR-15? Great, because that's what I'm about to do, but don't you worry, this one is just different enough to fool your brain into thinking that you haven't seen this same exact video umpteen million times before. Today we're talking Foxtrot Mike's FM-15. What is up, guys? My name is John with PewPewTactical.com, your definitive source for gun reviews, gear guides, and all things. I can just already tell that the comments are just gonna be about my glasses. You guys probably already know my spiel here if you've watched any of my other videos where I'm talking about AR-15s, and sometimes feeling like I'm stuck on some Groundhog's Day shit where I'm kind of struggling to figure out what part of this gun is supposed to be exciting or what thing would be interesting for you as a viewer to even hear about, because I'm probably not the guy that you want to come to if you'd want me to get really excited about a new gas tube or whatever. That being said, I think there's a good amount of cool features to be found on the FM-15. At least enough to warrant a video covering them without me feeling like I'm struggling to find stuff to talk about. So let's go ahead and do just that. The FM-15 utilizes a somewhat unique side charging mechanism up front to completely eliminate the need for a buffer tube and spring assembly, while still being a direct impingement driven rifle. This allows the rifle to be fitted with a folding stock and allows the user to fire said rifle with the stock folded, given that you've completely bypassed the need for the buffer assembly found on most ARs. This is achieved through the FM-15's unique lightweight bolt carrier, which reciprocates on a dual-nested recoil spring housed entirely in the upper receiver, interfacing with the forward charging handle via a raised portion on the gas key of the carrier, while the charging handle itself sits above a direct impingement gas system, very similar to what you're going to find on other AR-15s. The end result here, at least in theory, is that you've got the recoil reduction generally found on piston-driven rifles, given the overall smaller amount of reciprocating mass as compared to a normal bolt carrier bouncing off of a buffer assembly, without the physical or monetary heft piston-driven rifles generally incur. From front to back, the FM-15 utilizes a 16-inch nitride barrel chambered in 223 Wild, which guarantees function with both 5.56 NATO and 223 Remington cartridges, and is capped with your standard A2 birdcage flash hider. Nothing fancy there. The handguard is free-floating, extending the full 15 inches out to the muzzle device and contains 6 M-LOK slots positioned equidistant around it with a Picatinny optics rail up top. Although, due to the side charging feature, that pic rail is just a tiny bit higher up above the handguard than you may be used to. As a quick aside, I'm thankful that even smaller manufacturers have begun utilizing handguards that feature 45-degree M-LOK slots as standard. It's the end of 2021, and there's no excuse for that space to be occupied by speed holes when you can easily give the end user an additional 4 attachment slots at angles that I generally find much more useful than your standard 3, 6, and 9 o'clock positions. Other manufacturers, for God's sake, please take note. Thankfully, the charging handle up front is non-reciprocating, which means you aren't going to sprain your ham-shaped thumbs if you tend to C-clamp the rifle like I do. I have some thoughts on the charging handle itself and the user experience of manipulating it thereof, but I'll get into that in a sec when I talk about taking this thing out to the range. The FM-15's receiver is sleek and modern looking and features ambi fire controls with a shortened fire selector on the right hand side of the rifle, a feature I find quite useful for using my thumb to disengage the safety and my index finger's knuckle for throwing it back on. You've got a Magpul MOE pistol grip on the back, and what you've probably noticed by now is a Magpul Zhukov stock fixed to an adapter all the way aft. Originally designed for AK series rifles, the Zhukov is a little bit strange visually on an AR, but the look has grown on me over time, probably helped along by the fact that it's reasonably functional outside of perhaps offering a bit less in the way of adjustability for length of pull than your normal buffer tube setup. But it's a game of give and take if you absolutely need to have that side folding feature for whatever reason. First impressions out at the range are pretty stellar, and even though my opinion was probably skewed a bit by the several hundred rounds of 7.62x39 I had been firing through a pair of AKs immediately prior to switching over to the FM-15, the felt recoil did feel considerably less sharp than one might normally expect for an AR with a birdcage flash hider. And just because I know there's inevitably going to be some dude in the comment section angry that I'm talking about what AR recoil feels like at all, yes, obviously 223 is by no means means a chunky round, but there's certainly a difference between firing an AR with a birdcage and one with a muzzle brake. To me, the FM-15 feels much closer to a braked AR than anything else, even with its stock muzzle device mounted on the barrel. Take that for what you will. At 6.5 pounds, the rifle feels substantial without feeling burdensome. And even if that Zhukov stock kinda threw me off for a bit until I dialed in the manipulation of it, once you get used to it, I think the system works decently overall. We managed to get probably 600 rounds or so through the rifle in a day's worth of shooting and suffered no malfunctions to speak of. However, I did manage to induce several failures to fire while running drills on a barricade wherein I inadvertently was putting just enough pressure on the charging handle to take the gun just enough out of battery not to fire. But I'm willing to put most of the blame there on me. Once I readjusted my grip to stabilize the rifle in front of the charging handle, it ran just fine. Speaking of, fine is probably an adequate descriptor for my feelings on the charging handle as a whole as well. It's certainly adequate and does the job, but manipulating it doesn't exactly feel smooth. I'm not sure if it's the charging handle spring itself or the tandem springs the bolt carrier rides on, but this thing sure does feel a bit crunchy when you're driving the handle home. And it takes a pretty good amount of force to get completely rearward as well. It's not anything that soured the experience for me, and I eventually learned to work around it, but just be aware, an AK bolt this is not. It should also be mentioned that the charging handle can be repositioned so the handle faces downwards, or can be flipped onto the other side of the rifle entirely. I found the stock position reasonably adequate, so I didn't test out those alternatives, but they exist. As mentioned, the rifle can be fired with the Zhukov folded, and despite the light beer butt rock CAD video on Brownell's website that appears to show the stock covering the rifle's ejection port when folded, it does indeed ride at an angle that gives it just enough clearance not to obstruct your brass when they are being thrown. We tossed a Silencer Central Banish 30 on the gun just for funsies and managed to tear through a couple of mags with no issues to speak of, although obviously a 30 cal can isn't going to have an enormous impact on your muzzle report. However, while functional and not nearly as abrasive as, say, a stock suppressed AK that hasn't been tuned, this thing gets downright gassy when suppressed, so keep that in mind if you are thinking of going the tax stamp route with it. So where does all of that leave us? My own jaded, pithy comments aside, I think the FM-15 is actually pretty cool for what it is, even if it feels like kind of a lot of effort to wind up with a gun that you can shoot with a folded stock. It does the job well in a manner that's both sleek and functional. It's got all the modern features you'd expect from a reasonably mid-grade AR-15 right now, and perhaps best of all, it's still pretty damn cheap. As a Brownells exclusive, you're looking at a sticker price of a little over $1,000 for the full rifle, which is certainly cheaper than most piston-driven options floating around out there that'd achieve a similar result with stocks being folded and sides being charged. So you're going to have to decide if those features are big enough sells to take the dive on the FM-15, considering you're not getting the cleaner running system that a piston-driven gun would deliver. In short, I had fun with it, and maybe you will too if you want a gun that kind of feels like a Merc 16 and an AK did the fusion dance. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, click the bell, yell about my appearance as you are generally inclined to do. I get it. When this guy shows up in your neighborhood, your rent's going up and there's a barcade being constructed next door. My name is John with Pew Pew Tactical. We'll see you next time.